Okay, so here's one basic error that I guarantee will save you marks in your exam. So generally speaking, you'll get a question like this, where it'll say something along the lines of, find the range of values such that x squared plus x minus 6 is greater than 0. And what you do is you do the normal thing where you factorize it and you find the two values, minus 3 and 2, which satisfy this equation. But the problem is you need to work out what the inequality looks like. Now it's very tempting for students to always just write the exact same thing, which is this. But this is not always correct. So the way to check if it's correct or not is to actually sketch out the graph. So what you want to do is draw your two axes, x and y. Now you already know the solutions. It crosses the x-axis at minus 3 and also plus 2. Now, since it's a positive quadratic, it's always going to look like a big happy face. Okay. Now look at the values that we want. We want all of the values that are greater than 0, which means it has to be above the x-axis, which in this case is everything less than minus 3 and more than 2. So the actual answer to this one is x is less than minus 3 and x is greater than 2. Okay, so it's not in the middle. So let's look at another example. So again, we have, the question would be something along the lines of, find the range of values of x such that x squared plus 5x plus 6 is less than 0. So once again, you go through the process of factorization. This is all perfectly fine. You get x equals minus 3 and x equals minus 2. But again, what students tend to do is just rush into the process of minus 3x and minus 2. Now, like we saw in the previous part, this isn't always correct, and you always get 1 mark for actually getting this correct. Okay, so if it's a 3-mark question, you'll only get 2 if you just randomly say it. So once again, we're going to check. Now there are a little set of rules that we can go through to see which it is. And once again, we have minus 3 and minus 2. And it's a positive quadratic, which means it is definitely a U shape. Now the values for which it's less than 0 means it has to be underneath the x-axis. So in this question, this is actually correct. Okay. And lastly, what if it's a negative expression? Well, this is where it gets slightly more interesting. So again, you go through the process of factorization, and it's a bit more tricky because obviously it's a negative, so you have to do the slightly longer way. And once again, we need to check what it's going to look like. Well, once again, we draw our little axes, crosses at 2 and 3. I'm going to make it a bit bigger, it doesn't really matter. But because it's a negative x squared, it actually looks like a sad face, which reverses our rules. So instead of, if we're looking for the values which is underneath the x-axis, it's all of these values here. So in this case, it would be x is less than 2 and x is greater than 3. And that will get you your 4 marks. Okay, so I put a little end screen where you have a bunch of the rules, but I'd recommend just drawing it out instead of memorizing a bunch of rules. Okay guys, I hope that you enjoyed that little video on learning how to not make that small mistake that a lot of students tend to make on quadratic inequalities. If you think you need to brush up on that or even the discriminant stuff, I have a link to a 1 hour long video where I go through a bunch of exam questions on the discriminant and quadratic inequalities. Without further ado, I'll see you in the next one.